often humorously likened to an inflatable tube man on stage because of her enthusiasm, passion, and physicality. All flautist and multidisciplinary creator Eva Ding ever wants to do is imbue in her audience the same sense of joy and richness the performing arts bring to her. Through her innovative multimedia chamber music productions, Eva delves deep into the essence of the AAPI and immigrant experience, amplifying their narratives through a seamless blend of music, new media, choreography, set, and lighting design. With grants and residencies from esteemed institutions like Chamber Music America and Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, these shows have left audiences spellbound. From sharing the stage with Grammy and Oscar award-winning musician Jon Batiste, premiering his American Symphony at the iconic Carnegie Hall, to opening music festivities for pro wrestler Orange Cassidy at Independent Wrestling TV's electrifying family reunion match, Eva has proven her versatility and captivating stage presence time and again. Eva's career includes concerto debuts and performances alongside ensembles like the Brooklyn Chamber Orchestra, the United Nations Chamber Music Society, the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra, and the Auckland Chamber Orchestra. Her unwavering commitment to showcasing contemporary music has led to her premiere works by renowned composers, including the Golden Flute Concerto by Chinese-American luminary Chen Yi, and a new orchestral arrangement of Claude Bolling's Suite for Flute and Jazz Trio. In 2020, she founded flute cello duo Koei, and I may have got that wrong. They are committed to playing the works of living AAPI and other BIPOC composers, having premiered new works or arrangements by Li Yang, Zhao Long, and Corey Chang. Shanghai-born, Auckland-raised, and New York-based, Eva received her Bachelor of Music with honours from the University of Auckland under the tutelage of Professor Yui Grod, and as the recipient of the Manhattan School of Music President's Scholarship, completed her Masters of Music there with Robert Langvin, principal flautist of the New York Philharmonic. In her spare time, Eva loves playing with her poodle Choco, who adores singing along with her flute practice, and her ginger kitten Marigold, who really doesn't care either way for the flute. I don't think cats care either way for most things.
Don't.
How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
I'm really, really well. And thank you so much for joining us. And for those who don't know, this is the Wherever I Leave My Hat podcast, which I didn't intro at the top, but I'll do that here. We're all about talking to people who have an interesting take on the concept of home. And that's why we have Eva Ding here today with us. So Eva, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, kind of where you've come from and where you are at the moment?
Absolutely. So I was born in Shanghai in China, and at 5 or 6 years old, my parents made the decision to move us over to Auckland, New Zealand. And my dad stayed back behind in Shanghai because of work and also to take care of his parents, my grandparents. And so it was just me and my mom that moved to New Zealand. And so they made this huge sacrifice. They continue to be together, they continue to be married, but we're just on opposite sides of the world. And so I did most of my growing up in New Zealand, did my undergraduate studies there. And while I was in undergrad there, I'd always known I kind of liked the idea of America. I knew that America had this thriving entertainment industry, this arts community, this cultural, assets. And so while I was in my undergrad in my third year, I got a chance to go to UCLA on a study abroad exchange program that the University of Auckland had. And I went there for 6 months and I just loved it. I was like, well, the worst comes to worst, it could be bad or I don't like it, but at least I will have tried it. And that absolutely didn't happen. I just loved it. And so as soon as I did that, I was like, okay, I'm really going to work hard to do my graduate degrees, to audition into a music school in the States for my master's. And that's what I did. And so I came to New York, came to the Manhattan School of Music, and I've just been here since. I've absolutely loved it. It's been an incredible journey.
Yeah. I know, journey is one of those words that it sounds like a buzzword, but you end up using because there's no better word to describe it. It's been kind of co-opted by the sort of corporate buzz speak world, but it's still a great word in specific conversations. So just touching on a few things you just said to me, I'm really keen to explore a couple of those. So you mentioned sort of obviously your parents lived apart but stayed very much married, very much together. And because of that, that's the sacrifice they made you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about potentially how that may have shaped your view of home, because it's a non-traditional home life. Like obviously we hear non-traditional in terms of people perhaps being single parent families or split families, but this is quite unique in terms of they were still very much together emotionally, but not physically. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I think growing up, I just didn't ever really notice any different. It's like when people are like, "Oh, do you miss your dad?" And you're like, "Yeah, I do." But that's just how it is. Or like I'm an only child, and so people are like, "You have had siblings." I'm like, I don't know what life would have been like. So who's to say? Maybe I would have been. Maybe it would have been terrible. Putting them together could have been. Who's to say? But yeah, I think the old, being in my own romantic relationships or being in my own even just relationships, friends. I really the steps and the sacrifice and that they had to that my parents had to do to keep it working and to make things good for them and good for me. I think growing up, I did a lot of traveling, or like my dad would come to New Zealand every year or twice a year, and my mom and I would go back to Shanghai to visit my grandparents and him once a year or twice a year. And so traveling was also always a very big part of my life growing up. And I think also this feeling of going abroad and searching for home is very ingrained in me because that's what my parents did. That's what my mom did for me. And so I didn't really think twice about coming to New York. I other people who have been like, oh, this was a big decision, or people from other states or other cities in America being like, big decision to move to, it's a big decision to move somewhere else. And I reflect on that and I'm like, yes, it is. But I think I just always been told that's okay and to explore, and that my parents were always going to be there for me. And how blessed is that to be able to explore and find your home and create your own home. And also to that point, I do is with Koei, which you pronounce beautifully, and with a lot of the programming work that I do is an homage to them, is just totally inspired by them and their life and the sacrifices they made. Yeah.
Just touching on some of that, how long have you been in New York now? So how long since you left New Zealand to come to New York?
I came in 2017, which is now 7 years ago, which is an insane number to think about. Because I was like, oh, I just arrived. I just got here.
So in terms of that, and obviously you've had a sort of a split family dynamic a little bit, but obviously this is moving to somewhere where you didn't have family. And so you've had to sort of create your own network. How, obviously some of that has come through the music, some of that would have come through study, some of that come from, how have you gone about sort of building that family and home feeling in New York?
Absolutely. I often think about this because I think about how lucky I am that I came here for school, and a very specific school, very concentrated, conservatory, music conservatory. And so everyone met everyone. It was pretty small, so everyone knew everyone during orientation week. And I kind of like to joke that we suffered together and nothing bonds people together like trauma. All the hours of practice, all the hours of rehearsal, all the early morning theory classes, And so I met some of my closest, and even to this day, closest friends there because everyone understood what everyone else was going through. And so we really banded together and supported each other, which I thought was just such an incredible dynamic. And then through that expanded my network and my community, and just through the stuff that I've been doing, through the performances and the more cultural stuff and the more kind of, I wouldn't say advocacy, but advocacy in a way, advocacy through music. I've met people in that way too.
And so how did you meet your partner in Koei?
We met at grad school. In my
Mhm.
second year, I really wanted to play this piece for my graduation recital called Vox Ballet by George Crumb. It's Latin for Voice of the Whale. And it's this insane, 25-minute piece, all the way through, no breaks. And the performers are instructed to wear masks, and the lighting is supposed to be blackout except for blue lighting to emulate that feeling of being underwater. And everyone's amplified. And so it was flute, cello, and piano, prepared piano. And I had the pianist. I'd been working with him throughout my grad school studies. And I just asked a mutual friend of the cellists and I, hey, do you know any great cellists? I'm playing this awesome piece. I would love to, really meet someone really great to collaborate with. And he was like, you've got to meet Emma. You guys would totally get along. You guys totally have the vibe, similar vibes. And so I asked her on, yeah. And then my pianist and I graduated, and she was the year below us in grad school. And then COVID happened. So everything kind of went bleep.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there at home, and one of my dear friends and mentors reached out to me, and we were chatting, and she was like, hey, you're a chamber ensemble, right? Like, I have a friend who would like to apply for a grant from Chamber Music America to mentor a chamber ensemble. She's, she's ready to apply. She just needs a chamber ensemble to apply with. And I was like, well, like, we're all kind of dispersed. We haven't really played much since graduation. The pianist at that point was off in DC because he's an incredible collaborative pianist. And he got into a program with the National Opera. And so I was like, he's far away. But the cellist, yeah, she's in New York. So I called her up and I was like, do you want to just apply to this thing, just you and me? And at that point, she was telling me, she was like clawing at the walls to do something. So she was like, yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. The plot. I was like, great, yeah, let's do it. And so we applied as a duo with some of the clips of our graduation recital and some of the stuff that we had played, and as much of the two of us playing as possible. And we got the grant, and that was really, and then we got a performance and a couple of performances, and that was really the catalyst to being like, oh, this could be a thing. There's something here, actually. And that was a really exciting spark then.
Nice. That's really cool. And that's a really cool story. Yeah, COVID did funny things to a lot of people.
Yeah.
My wife and I now, we were back in New Zealand, and we weren't super early in our relationship. We'd been a little while, but we hadn't moved in together yet. And we were sort of we'll talk towards the end of the year. And then Auckland went into that enormous lockdown that went from like July to December. And it was like that. Well, if we don't do this now, we won't see each other, and we don't know how long this is going to go. So you kind of make leaps of faith, I think, a little bit when you're put in situations like that, in terms of, okay, well, we've got nothing to lose. Let's try it. And I think that sometimes the best decisions you make ever come out of those kind of, well, let's just try it moments. I think when you mentioned about going to New York and saying, well, if I don't like it in 6 months, I'm a huge fan of like not leaving what ifs. Life is too short to go, oh, I wish I had, or what if I had? I think if I look back to when I moved to New Zealand at 22 from the UK, I nearly didn't go. And then I was like, I remember having a conversation with my mum, who, my mum did not want me to move halfway across the world. Yeah. And I remember her going, you can come back. No decision is irreversible. You can come back. So it was like, well, yeah, nothing to lose a try. And then 23 years later, I finally left New Zealand to come to America, which probably wasn't on the initial plan either.
But you got to try. What got you started? What got you to
go for it?
What got you interested in New Zealand to begin with at 22? So that
as a lot of people do, I'd met a partner, a woman in the UK. So we worked together, and we were supposed to do a year in New Zealand, a year in Australia, working holidays, and then come back to the UK because her visa had run out. She was from New Zealand. And even when that sort of relationship had fizzled out a little bit, or completely fizzled out, New Zealand by that stage was home. I didn't really want to, or it felt like home. I didn't really want to come back to the UK at that point. And I think that's something, I talked on a previous episode around this a little bit. It's like UK will always be where I'm from. And in some parts, it will always be home.
Yeah.
But I have no desire to live there again. That's not where I'll go back. I'll never live back in the UK, even though, I still support all the British sports teams, English sports teams, all of that stuff. But I can't imagine ever living back there. And I suppose that's the thing here. America is, and having been here a much shorter time than you, is a country where people, when it becomes very, they treat patriotism and national identity slightly more intensely than perhaps we're used to in the UK or in New Zealand. How do you find that influences your sort of feeling of home here?
Interesting. I guess I never really considered it. I feel very, well, kind of to answer your question like this, it's this feeling of I actually feel quite secure in saying where I'm from and being proud of where I'm from. Because even in New Zealand, I had to kind of be like, well, I was born in China, but like you can hear my accent. I basically sound like a Kiwi. Maybe there's an American twang now at this point, but and so growing up, I kind of had to fight for purchase in terms of, oh, but I am from here. And so because of that, coming to America, I'm like, I'm proud of wherever I'm from, and be that China, be that New Zealand, be that eventually the States. But like my journey is unique to me, and so I think, does it make sense? So it's like
I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's like okay, yeah, like right now New York is my home, and I would love for it to be my home forever. It's just such a arts and cultural overload, and I love it. And I have yet to explore. I think I've explored maybe 2.5% of the whole everything that it has to offer. So I feel very much like, this is my home because I live here, and I've made my roots here, and I'm just so used to it being. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting point about New Zealand. It's a wonderful country full of wonderful people, but it can be a little cliquey in terms of, if you're not from there and you didn't, if you're not from there originally, there can be that kind of disassociation a little bit in terms of, is it really your home? And I think that's because such a big percentage of people there are immigrants in terms of that people kind of, I don't know. And I would have had a very different experience. I'm a middle-aged white man in a country like that. I'm not a person of color. I'm not from Asian heritage, and everyone's experience is different. And I'm very aware that I get treated differently because of that. And I think perhaps because of your Chinese heritage, that would have colored some of that a little bit. Would that be fair?
Certainly, yeah. And I feel like it's weird because in New York, people don't blink twice about, I say I'm from New Zealand. And like, they won't be like, oh, but where are you really from? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, where's your accent? Because sometimes I'll like maybe lean towards more of the Americans spectrum of accents, and they'll be like, oh, but where's your accent? Like they won't think twice about, because New York especially, and this is not obviously does not cover the rest of America, but New York especially is such a melting pot of different cultures in different places. And also I feel like people in New York know that it's a hot spot for people to come and do something and be somewhere and be someone and learn something and make something with themselves. That they're like, yeah, okay, you're from somewhere else, but here's home for now. Great. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably, I get a slightly different experience here. Because Alabama isn't necessarily where a lot of people have high on their list to go if you're from another place.
Right.
And we're probably not going to get into all the reasons why on this podcast, but there are reasons.
Love the podcast for it.
Yeah, but Birmingham is where I am. It's a fairly multicultural place, and it's a little different to say living out in a rural Alabama. But I still get asked all the time. I get, first I get is where you're from, The second point is, are you from Australia? Which is about the most offensive thing you can say to an Englishman who lived in New Zealand for 20 years.
But really,
And then the third thing, and this is where the experience probably changes from you, like from what you've just said in New York, people go, well, I understand why you're here, because New York or LA, that's where people come to make their dreams come true. I get well, why Birmingham? Why Alabama?
why?
Because it isn't a normal transition for people, or one that they see a lot of. And so my accent, whilst you'll get, oh, your accent, where's it from? Mine's, it's almost like a kind of unique kind of party trick. People that like, oh, because they haven't heard it. Now there are other English people here. I went to a pub to watch the European Championships with other English people. So it's not unheard of, but it isn't as common to hear as you would be in sort of New York or LA, where it's a lot more prevalent, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to sort of the next one, one of the things that we talked about over email before this was sort of, you had a series of music based around the concept of home and the premise of home. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that, hear kind of how those experiences shaped your music. And I'll play some of your music at the end of the episode based on the stuff you sent me. So I'm really excited to share that. I had a good listen this morning. I was really good. So I'd love to play that. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about how that kind of concept of home has shaped the music that you've composed and that you've put together, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I think this project, it's called For Mom Dad, which feels kind of self-explanatory, and it goes back to what I was saying before about how me reflecting back on the sacrifices and the journey that my parents have made, I've really put into perspective, me being the age that I am, like close to when they did the big move, what kind of put into perspective, like exactly what they did for me. And so a lot of what I do is an homage to them. It started off as this idea in my head of like, why isn't classical music more interesting? And why are we not bringing in, like, why is the audience around, the audience in the classical music sphere not reflective of the world that's around us? Why am I only seeing a certain type of audience member? And how can I make it so that everyone feels welcome? And so I was like, well, let's make it more visually appealing. Let's bring in projected media, projection mapping, new media. And eventually the third one that we've recently done, we brought in choreographers and dancers and really put the audience in the middle of the stage and gave it that kind of immersive theater feeling. And my other thing was, let's make it so that the program has a narrative structure. And so I wish I could say that I composed any of those pieces. I did not. I'm not skilled, nor am I talented enough. And some of the pieces I did help arrange. So they were maybe for violin and cello at first. And I was like, I can play the violin part. Why not? And so I arranged it for flute and cello. And so it started off as bringing in pieces and many of them by composers of Asian heritage, API composers, because I felt that was really important to me and Emma. And we kind of put together a program that showed kind of the trials and tribulations of the immigrant journey. And that was the first one. And we had someone create visual art that really kind of brought the narratives. And that went well, and we kept expanding it. And so the second set of performances that we did maybe 3 years ago was this idea of what it means to call a place home. And we actually had people write pieces for us for our audiobook, and that was really special. And so they kind of took the concept of home, what it meant to them, and they composed. So we will she composed. There's one called Sunset in Gion and one called Homecoming. And the Sunset in Gion is, he's Japanese, and so it's this beautiful area in Japan where a lot of the geishas roam the streets and, very evocative. So the second one. And the most recent one was the biggest one. And I'm talking more about it because it's much fresher in my memory. And it was one of the biggest productions to date. And that had a really strong narrative structure because I found this set of letters between a Chinese American couple. The husband was already in the US in Helena, Montana in the 1950s or so. And the wife was stuck back in China, waiting for her papers with their child, with their son and their unborn child. And the letters are all from her. So we don't see what he replies, but there's something beautiful about the fact that like she kept the letters so pristine that we could even read them to this day. And all the letters are like, from her saying like, I'm doing well. I miss you. Like the thought of you keeps me up at night. Or please don't worry about me. Please worry about your own health. Make sure that you're healthy because I want to see you when I'm here. You know, the immigration people, they said that I was missing a document, and they couldn't see me the same day, so they have to see me when they're next open. And it's going to take me a week to get back home to get the thing, and then a week to get back to the immigration offices. So I can't see them for another 2 weeks. It's that kind of stuff. And I read that and I was like, oh my God. Like, it's honestly not that different to a lot of what people still have to deal with. Yeah, sure, stuff is a little quicker. But the fact that immigration is like, man, and
I was like, yeah, it might be quicker sending the document. I'm not sure the process is dramatically quicker.
I don't know if they're any like,
yeah.
but okay, sure, we have FaceTime now, we have text, but this feeling of distance, this feeling of not being able to touch your loved one, that just really got to me. And so I was like, we have to make a whole show about this and inspired by this. And so that was like the big one about like this longing for home. And I think going back to one of the questions you had asked very early on was this like, oh, what does home mean to you? And in exploring all of this and in my own life, for me, home certainly is a feeling of the people. The people are what makes home home. Like, I think New York would not feel like home if I didn't have my loved ones here. And because like my family is not here. And so that could feel very different for different people. And like whenever I go back to New Zealand, I'm instantly at home because my mom is there and my dog is there, and some of my really close friends from high school, for example. And same with Shanghai, like I hadn't lived in Shanghai since I was 6. So like really, by all accounts and purposes, it's not like I'm not familiar. I couldn't tell you directions to save my life, but because my dad lives there, it feels like. So yeah, it's that ever changing of what it needs to come for me.
Yeah, I hear that, and I feel that as well. Because I'm fairly, as I said, fairly new here, and I haven't built that circle of friends yet. And New Zealand feels probably the most home for me because that's where I've got the biggest circle of friends. I spent most of my adult life there. So there's that feeling of home there. And it's really interesting when I do go back to the UK, and I go back 2-3 times a year, generally for work. And I see friends and I see my sister. My parents live in Spain, so I don't always get to see them when I go back. And that does reduce the feeling of home when I go back because it doesn't have that kind of safety net feeling around it that perhaps New Zealand does. And I say that having not been back to New Zealand since I moved here, and I'm going back in a few weeks, so just for a week for work. But it is that feeling of kind of where it does feel like home and that kind of touch. And I kind of wanted to go back to the letters piece for you. Do you think that inspired more because of what your parents' relationship was as part of that, and that's why it resonated so strongly?
Definitely. I definitely think so because I think about I think about like when I was younger, I didn't really process this, right? Where we had to go buy international calling cards. I don't know if you've ever had students at the dairy.
Yep.
I had to put money on it. And then we had to unplug like the Wi-Fi, or it's not Wi-Fi or whatever, like the internet, because if
Yeah.
you picked up the phone, it would be static or white noise. So we had to unplug. We didn't have the use of the internet, and then we had to dial in the card
Yeah.
number and then PIN, and then it would tell us how much money was left, and then that was precious. Like
Yep.
I thought, it just like I had this visceral, but like it easy as it is, like you was hopping on a phone. I want to be able to all overseas to a loved one, and I didn't appreciate that back in the day when I was a kid, for sure.
It is that feeling. I remember when I moved to New Zealand, 2001.
Yeah.
Broadband wasn't ubiquitous yet. Like, it just wasn't. Like I was staying, where I was staying, we had dial-up internet. So I had calling cards, exactly the same. And for those of you that aren't from New Zealand, a dairy just means like a corner store or a convenience store.
It's, you will if you're New York.
Bodega. It's not an actual dairy where cows are, as I've been asked here when I've used that comment and said dairy. But yeah, exactly the same with the calling cards. And it does change the dynamic, because we used to write letters, or you'd write emails. 2001, we're still writing emails to each other. But it isn't that immediacy of contact that you get now with, being able to do this, right? You're the other side of the country from me, or a fair way from the country from me. But I've done interviews with people in California. I've got interviews lined up with people back in New Zealand. So it is really interesting now. We get this immediacy of contact. We get this immediacy of being able to see people on the screen. And it's better, but it still isn't the same visceral feeling that when you're there with someone, and I work remotely full time. My job is to be remote and stuff like that. And you miss people, and people, but you're on Zoom all day, and I am, but it is not the same. It is not the same as being in person. And you do miss that. And do you think that influences the way that you composed these shows and these events, because it is less visceral based on those letters? Like, there's that longing and that feeling, but you don't have that immediacy.
Interesting. I feel like the awesome thing about the arts, though, is that it transcends language. And so, okay, the letters are in Chinese. We translated them to English to have as subtitles. But we had the media aspect. We had the dances. We had 2 dances that kind of showed through their movement and their art form, this longing. And, it wasn't as black and white, as obvious as there was a male dancer and a female dancer, and he was carrying the suitcase or whatever. But they showed through their art. And we had one of our great friends and great collaborators, Koei Chang, write a piece for us based on those letters. And what was going to be maybe like a 10-minute piece flourished into this long 30-minute odyssey. It was flute, cello, and percussion and electronics. And so to be able to tell the story through our instruments was such a privilege, I think. And I'm hoping, and I hope that it got the point across in translation.
So on that note, if people, and I'll share some of the recordings that you played with me, but just as a taster, so that if people do want to access your music, see you live, access your multimedia, where should they find that out?
We're on Instagram, my duo and I, as Koei, Koe, duo, DUO. And same with our website, koeiduo.com. Then I have my own website, eva-ding.com, where I'm on Instagram as its Eva Ding, EVATING. Yeah, and that's, I feel like, social media and web. I need to get better at updating my websites, but social media is the best place to keep as updated as possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed our chat today. And it's really, I do love listening to the way really talented artists interpret things like this, because I think they put I don't have to use the word visceral probably a bit too much, but they put that emotive kind of almost touchable feeling to things that sometimes us mere mortals don't have the ability to do. So again, thank you so much for your time. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you so much for having
And
me.
awesome. And if you want to hear more, there'll be more episodes coming out soon. You're able to access us. Obviously, if you're on YouTube, please comment, like, subscribe, all the things that you're supposed to do. Same on Spotify, Apple Music. Leave us a review. Let us know how you're going. That will help spread the reach of the podcast. And again, thank you, Eva, and have a great day, everybody.
As promised, we're now going to play a piece of Eva's performance. This is going to be From Something to Say by Koei Chang. It is based on the letters that Eva mentioned earlier. Enjoy.
I have something. I have something. Something, 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 something. What I have to say. What I have to say, what I long to say, what I long. What I have, what I have, what I have to say, what I have, what I have, what I have, what I have, what I have. Long. What I long to. What I have to. 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 Say what I long to.